Hello, you wonderful people. So for today's video, I'm going to talk about the MCU, the Marvel movies, just the MCU as a whole, and about something I think is kind of an interesting topic of discussion, and that's kind of like the third act of any Marvel movie. Now, obviously, for a lot of people, they've entered that territory of burnout because, like, oh my God, there's so much Marvel, but I guess for me, I've never hit that point, and I think it's such an interesting conversation because I was reading an article that someone had written up like a couple months back, where like obviously like a lot of the shows and stuff haven't really hit with them, and that's kind of the general I mean, that's been a really big phase 4 situation because like phase 4 has been very hit and miss for a lot of people. There's probably been way more misses than hits for them. I've enjoyed all of phase 4, both movie and TV show wise. That's not been the case. There's some people like, oh, I like some of the movies, I like some of the shows, but it's been very like some of the shows and some of the movies have been very like very split, you know, divided, like, you know, audience wise and stuff like that. So that's a whole conversation in itself. But more recently, kind of tying into that, is someone like their burnout comes from the third act because they feel like, oh my God, every Marvel movie has to end with this big action-packed thing, which there's multiple points I want to make on that front. For one, I'm like, well, they kind of have to, because these are at the core action movies. Yes, they're superhero movies, and because they are superhero movies, because they are action movies, there is probably a thing of they probably do have to have a certain amount of action to them, because if they don't have that third act big set piece battle, like you're like, oh, that's boring to you. I'm like, but yeah, that's how you sell a movie. Like most action movies are that. Like, yes, they're superhero movies, and at the core, I mean, I'm not saying every comic, I'm not well versed in the comics, so I don't know if every comic books kind of third act kind of does that same thing, but I feel like a lot of third acts have to have that bit bombastic thing, but because it's like one Marvel movie after another that does that, and that ends up being more and more people's complaints of just like everything being the same, ending the same. But I'm like, even more recently with like Black Panther Wakanda Forever, obviously not getting into spoilers if you haven't seen it already, but yes, it ends in a very big bombastic, like, you know, I mean, it doesn't end fully that way. It ends on a very somber note, the very ending of it. But the fact is that third act big battle, but I'm also like, yeah, that movie can't just be like the emotional roller coaster that movie was. I think if there was some sprinkled in like it was, sure, but I think it's like, because for someone it's like the emotional stuff is what mattered to me. The action stuff was kind of second. I don't care about that anymore. But I'm like, yeah, but I feel like that's how you draw in a general audience, because if that movie was just like the drama it was, I don't think you could, you know, yes, there's going to be the people who see it because it's a Marvel movie, but I think people who are there for the Black Panther of it all might be there for like the drama of it, but the general public, you need it to also be an action movie too. I think that's how it gets made. It's like, yes, like there's probably like a thing of like, yeah, it needs to have a certain amount of action in it because we need to also sell it as an action movie. I mean, if you look at the teaser, because I have not watched the trailer, so I don't know how the trailer really goes about selling the movie, but the teaser trailer sold it as like this emotional movie, which it is. So I'll just say that's fascinating, because I think that issue people have is kind of an issue only in the movies, like that third act being this big bombastic action stuff. Because you look at the shows, like, yes, they kind of have somewhat their action sequences, but it's like most of those shows don't, they end in a big bombastic way, but not in the same level, in the same way, because obviously there's a smaller budget, it's less time, so like, you know, it's on a smaller screen, so it's a little different. Like you take WandaVision, like to some extent, yeah, but also it's just like mainly, you know, the Vision versus Vision, or even Wanda versus Agatha, like there's some bombasticness to it, but like how those fights play out is very, very unique and different. You take Falcon and the Winter Soldier, yeah, there's bombastic stuff, but that kind of plays into like the Winter Soldier Civil War of it all. Where, I mean, at least Winter Soldier, where like there's a grounded element to it. Yes, Falcon's, you know, Sam's in the Falcon suit and everything, his Falcon Captain America suit, but it's still like grounded enough, and like the messaging at the end of that larger conversation had at the end of that series, that's a whole thing. Loki has like an action sequence, but majority of its ending is conversation. Like Hawkeye is kind of the same vein as Falcon and Winter Soldier, where it's like a very low key, like no pun intended, very low key ending about, and yes, it has more of a grounded sense, even with some of the more like science fictional stuff happening there. So, and that's just kind of like, I mean, obviously it's got a very Die Hard element to it. Like Die Hard kind of is like, it kind of has that same like feel and vibe to Die Hard in that regard. So Miss Marvel's kind of the same way. Yeah, it has some, I mean, even then it's like, even I wouldn't put that in the same vein, because it's like, yeah, that's a not even like, even that's not the bombastic action sequence that it is. And a great example, well, Moon Knight kind of ends on a bombastic one as well, but there's like a lot of more of an emotional, twisty, turny, like roller coaster in that regard too. And then I use She-Hulk for example, because obviously maybe, I mean, and obviously She-Hulk is the most divisive show, and I even said at the time, I knew that finale was going to be immensely divisive, but regardless of how you feel about it, they swung for the fences of that is not a typical Marvel ending as most people would kind of have an issue with. So that whole finale, like how they went about that, is like nothing's been done like that in the MCU before. So that's where I kind of like would push back against that argument. Like, I guess like those are my points of argument. Like, you can disagree with that and that's fine, we can have a conversation about that, but those 2 points of you kind of have to with the movies, because that's you're kind of selling those as superhero movies have to be more action-packed, because that's how general audiences are conditioned to kind of head down that route. Like, don't get me wrong, you can do superhero stuff and not being this action-packed thing, that it can have these low, like, drama moments. I mean, the greatest example I will give is Legion. But Legion is such a weird show, you can't pitch that to a general audience, because most people are like, what the hell is this show? If you've never seen Legion, it's a very, like, psychological show. Like, it has, like, very, like, psychological themes to it. And the way that show is structured, like, you can't get a general audience behind it, because that show has very few in between, like, action sequences. You know, it's very like character and psychologically driven, that I'm like, I don't know how you can't. That's why that show sadly did not have like the biggest like viewership. Like, that show has its niche, very niche audience, but I think most people would want something like Legion, but I'm also like, I think Legion is too weird for general audiences to really grapple to. And, you know, maybe that's me underestimating a general audience speaking, but I just don't think Legion speaks to everyone. Like, even if you're looking for something different, Legion still might not work to you, because you might, that's too far in the other realm. It's not the middle ground. 'Cause I feel like Loki's kind of in the middle ground, well, what people probably would enjoy type of situation. So like wanting something different while still keeping in that same vein, because I feel like maybe obviously you could have everyone has their arguments. I'm not talking about the extreme people who are just like, we're ignoring them, but just people who didn't enjoy She-Hulk for their respective reasons. Everyone's entitled to it. Like, a lot of people hate watch that show, and I'm not even talking about the more extreme people, just the people who didn't like it. There's a group of people in that vein who just straight up hate watch that show. But it's like, yeah, that show was very, very different from anything else MCU wise, with its structure and the way it went about approaching things. And once again, that didn't work for some people, it worked for others. I'm one of the people it severely worked on. I really enjoyed that show as a whole, and I really enjoyed that that finale as well, because I thought, like, man, you swung for the fences on that. But yeah, that's it. Those 2 points are just kind of, like I said, my pushback against that argument about like, oh yeah, that third act thing, because I'm like, you kind of have to. And then on a TV show front, they haven't really done that as much, and maybe that's an issue. I mean, obviously for some people, the TV shows have their own issues, but that would be my pushback against that argument about like why like the action. It's like, yeah, like maybe you're not watching everything that does the non-Marvel thing. Yes, it does it in some regards, but it does it on a smaller scale because the budgets have been pushed in, and these things are like on a smaller scale. They're more personal scale. They're more character driven. They're able to be more character driven because they have more time to flush things out. Maybe not enough in some cases, so on and so forth. It's just it's a smaller part of a much larger conversation. And obviously, I just thought, you know, it was an interesting topic that I just kind of wanted to talk about. Obviously, like I said, these are my thoughts. I'd love to get to know yours in the comments down below. You do not have to agree at all. I'm just putting my point of view out there. Maybe you agree, maybe you disagree. I'd love to have that conversation. But really, that's all I want to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.